All right. Hello, everyone out there in Facebook Live land. I'm super excited about not only our topic today, but our very special guest. I'm going to introduce him in just a second, but I just wanted to welcome everyone. Today's topic is the power of storytelling, which at The Mighty, as you know, is one of our favorite topics. I am your host, Kat Harrison. I am the community content manager at The Mighty, and I am also an author and chronic illness advocate. And down below, you will see Colin Balfe. He is the founder of Love What Matters. Colin, how about you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, my name's Colin Balfe. I started a media organization called Love What Matters. We tell stories of hope, kindness, compassion, support, but really all have the overarching theme of helping people feel less alone in the world, letting them know that they can overcome obstacles, and trying to draw out empathy from other people. We have about 8 million, a little over 8 million people on Facebook, a little under 480,000 people on Instagram, and we are very passionate about the power of storytelling.
Wow, that's a lot of people. How long have you guys been around?
Just about 5 years now.
Wow, actually very similar to The Mighty, which is very cool. I would love the story of how Love What Matters started is a very, very great story. So I would love to hear it if you would be up to sharing.
Yeah, it's a pretty personal story, and I think in my business, you have to feel comfortable being vulnerable and telling these stories. So I think it's a big part of everything that we do here, and it informs and inspires everything that we do. So Love What Matters was really inspired through my mom. She was a mom of 3 boys. I am the youngest of those 3 boys. She got breast cancer. She got ovarian cancer. She ended up beating the breast cancer, but she succumbed to the ovarian cancer. But classic mom, typical mom style. She was always thinking about her family the entire time, even in her final days. And so even at the time I was living in Manhattan, she was living in Florida, I would fly in to see her. The first time, it was basically a series of goodbyes, 3 different goodbyes. The first time I went in and we're all thinking about her and we're worried about her and telling her how much we love her. And she just said, I'm worried about you. And I said, you're worried about me? What do you mean? She said, when I pass away, you're going to have this grief and this pain to deal with. What are you going to do? And I'm like, let's table that, or let's not worry about that. And she keeps talking about it and says, you're going to have to do something with that grief, with that pain. Okay, Mom. Second time I go see her again, she starts in, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with, you're my youngest son. You're my most sensitive. You're very creative. What are you going to do when I pass? Third and last time I see her, our final goodbye, I don't know if she had strategized this or what, but she basically looks at me and says, you're going to have to use this pain and use this grief, and you're going to have to turn it into something beautiful. I want you to use it. I want it to let it fuel you, and pour it into something and create something beautiful. I know you can. And so that's really, the story of Love What Matters and how it was born. And I didn't really know what she meant at the time. I don't know if she knew what she meant at the time. But that was really the beginning of this massive viral deeply personal storytelling platform, because I started to look around and I started to think, okay, well, I'm dealing with this grief. I'm not the only one dealing with grief, but other people are dealing with their own cancer diagnosis or anxiety or depression. There's a million different things. So how can we help people navigate those issues? How can we help, the mother who has a child with a autism diagnosis who has no idea what that means? Well, okay, there's a spectrum. How do I understand that kind of labyrinth of getting through that? And are there people out there like me who are doing it, and can I learn from that? And so that was kind of the whole overarching idea between all these different categories that people are going through. How do we shine a light on those stories, not only to help those people that are writing those stories, because it's so cathartic to write that, but also to give others strength, to lift others up, and to give others hope.
Well, a couple of things. One, your mom sounds wonderful. And also, she was a mom till the very end.
Yeah,
She was
true.
thinking about you. And I really like what you said about turning pain into something. And I think that is such a visceral experience, and it's definitely something that I've done in my life. I have a very, very long history with illness. I actually had a pretty serious surgery when I was 15. I had a bacterial infection and actually had a reaction to antibiotics, and am now disabled and now live with things like chronic migraine and SUNCT syndrome. And I actually didn't start talking about my story until 2017, which is very hard to believe because now I'm here sharing my personal story on the internet. But it has been extremely cathartic for me, just so how I think that you shared, Colin, how cathartic it's been for you and how cathartic it's been for so many others. I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about, I guess, the types of stories that you see at Love What Matters, the different sections, I would guess.
Yeah, so a couple of different things. So, we focus on uplifting stories and feel good stories when we can. But I also think it's incredibly important to realize and recognize all of life is not feel good, right? All of life is not that way. It's great when it is, but it's just not always that way. And so we try to be true to life, and we try to be honest, and we try to have our stories reflect, the things that everybody goes through, because that struggle and that challenge is, as cliche as it is really what gives you that strength, because you can then overcome that challenge. And now you have this confidence realizing, if I can do this, I can do this. And so, it's those kind of buckets of, does this story make someone feel less alone? Does this story make you realize that you can overcome obstacles in life? And really, underneath that, it's, very specific things like parenting and autism and chronic illness and illness. There's probably, honestly, over 100 different categories. If you want me to go into my favorite one, I'm happy to, but there's so many. So my favorite category is probably adoption, just because I think there's a cosmic kind of magic to the world of adoption. If you think about, a baby who doesn't have a parent in their life, a baby who, would grow up with that anxiety, with that insecurity their entire life. And that's a challenge. And then you think about a mom or a dad or both who can't have kids, who are trying desperately through IVF and years of struggle and pain and money and financial burden. And they're trying to have children and they can't. And so when those two things meet and come together, it's such a beautiful, I think, moment. And my favorite ones of those are siblings, because, you have one child without a parent. That child comes into the home, and just when you think you couldn't get any happier in life, just when you think things could not get better, we have reached the mountaintop. You are then able to bring home the sibling, and you realize, the family unit that you have and that you've created. So I think, there's a million different stories that are my favorite, but I think those have a certain blend of magic to them.
I also think that there aren't a ton of places that speak about adoption stories. So I really like that is a focus on Love What Matters, because, adoption has so many different colors and facets to it, and families can be made up of so many different things. So I think that each story is really unique.
Exactly.
So yeah, I love that. I guess, could you tell us a little bit about how Love What Matters has grown, I guess, through the years? Like, how do you get stories? What does that look like?
Yeah. So we started out really just on social. We were, socially native on Facebook and on Instagram. That was really for the first 2 years. Then we launched the website about 3 years ago. We also launched a book with Simon & Schuster. And then we've done about 3 podcasts. So we've had a number of brand extensions over the years, but we've tried to stay true to that, original storytelling DNA, that power of lifting others up, giving others strength where we can, and really just kind of diving in. The book is really kind of more feel good, and because it's so curated and specific to these themes around all of the categories that we have, whether it's special needs or parenting. It's trying to really show that arc of overcoming obstacles at the end, but that's mostly feel good. I think the comment I hear most often about the book is, did I lose you?
No, I'm here.
Okay. The comment I see most often about the book is, I can't stop rereading it. Like I pick it up and I read it and I cry, and then I come back to it and I cry. And most of the time we want those tears to be happy tears.
Yeah.
And so that was really the goal with the book.
I love it. Yeah. I also wrote a book, which is,
right. Congratulations.
Yay, thank you. Yes, it came out in March. This has been the weirdest year to debut a book. But
weirdest year for a lot of things.
Oh, yes, it has. In fact, I actually want to get to that, so don't let me forget about it. But I just wanted to say it is not only cathartic, I think, for the person telling the story, but then also cathartic for the people that are reading it. So I think that sometimes we don't always think about storytelling as going both ways. I think a lot of times we think of the reader, the person absorbing the story, the person who's getting a lot out of it. But then we also have to think about what the person telling the story gets out of it as well, which I think is a really interesting dichotomy. But I wanted to dive into storytelling in the pandemic, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on the role storytelling has had this year. Where do you picture storytelling going or being? Is it different? Is it the same?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think if you look at the role of people in households now, and where they were, primarily at a job 9 to 5 or 9 to 7, whatever the case may be, or they were primarily a parent or primarily a teacher, right? Now they're all of those things and more. Yeah. And so I think the concept of self-care and taking care of yourself, and anxiety and taking care of all of that has really kind of entered the, national conversation, if you will, because people, how is anyone not anxious this year, right? How is anyone not going through something? And so I think this idea of, well, if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to take care of anybody else. And I think, out of that, a lot of stories are born, and a lot of people realize what they're going through in their daily life, and how many people are really going through the same thing right now.
Definitely. I've seen what's been interesting to me is that I feel like for a very long time, health, not that it was a taboo topic, but it was just something that wasn't talked about in the normal everyday ethos. And I feel like now, since March especially, health is what people talk about all the time. And especially from the Mighty, I'm all about health stories. But I am hoping that mental health especially is continuing to be talked about always, that we'll always ask people how they're actually doing, that we'll always tell stories about struggle and how we got through things, because that's actually been very refreshing to me. I don't want to find all these good things that happened this year, but I do think having more, deep conversations has been really, really nice. And I've seen them on the Mighties, just people being a little bit more supportive of each other when they're down, when they're struggling, because I think that everyone, is feeling it definitely to various effects.
It's funny because, in times like this year, when hopefully people are reflecting on what they're going through and they realize the fragility of life, and how sacred it is, and this time is sacred, you would hope that out of all of this, people will recognize that and remember that, and hopefully, once we get through this and out the other side, there's a newfound resilient, not only resilience, but appreciation for what you have.
Definitely. And I think that is where stories come into it as well. Like, the power of storytelling is to be taking this year or next year and being able to tell it in a way that tells your story and tells what you've been through and what the larger world has been through. So I think that there's a lot of overlap there. I guess we've talked about the power of storytelling, but I guess I want to talk about, why might it be hard for someone to tell their story? Or have you ever encountered talking to someone and they're like, I'm not sure if I really want to open up?
Oh yeah, all the time. Yeah, I think it's really hard, right? I think it's really uncomfortable to listen. You're sharing your most vulnerable moments with absolute strangers, right? And I think that can be overwhelming. That can be intimidating. That can be uncomfortable. I think it's just really hard to do. But I think once people start doing it, they realize the power of it. They realize the strength in it. And it's a journey of healing depending on where you are and what you're going through in life. My grief with my mom, as anyone who's lost someone who's incredibly, their biggest cheerleader in life, right? That's not something that you ever really get over, but it's something that you learn to kind of live with. And so I think, telling those stories helps you process the experiences that you're going through in life and helps you kind of realize those struggles and helps you grow from them as well.
Definitely. One of my things that I say is that being vulnerable on the internet is like cracking your chest open and saying, here I am. Take a look around inside. It's really difficult. I still struggle with it. I mean, I've been telling my story consistently, publicly, written everywhere, and I still get anxious. I was anxious before this.
How has it felt for you?
So healing. Like, I can't even describe it. I used to feel so much shame around all of my pain and all of my struggles. I used to feel, not that I'm perfect, but just so imperfect based on what I've been through. And while I still definitely encounter that, I would not, sometimes I do struggle with my self-confidence and my self-esteem based on, chronic pain, which completely warps you. But talking to people and then having people come back to me and be like, wow, like I'm going through the same thing, or thank you for saying that. I've never had the courage to say that. That has healed me and has made me feel, okay, that it's okay to not be okay. And I have found that I push myself to share my story because it allows me to feel better. And if someone hears it, great. And if not, then I still feel good.
Good. That's great.
Yeah. It took a really long time to get that though.
Yeah, it's not easy.
No, it's not easy. And that's why I'm always amazed, the Love What Matters community and the Mighty community is people willing to come out and talk about the deep, darkest parts of who they are. That is not easy. For how much time we all spend talking about the weather or about what we like in our coffee, right? Then there are people out there sharing these really hard things that they go through. Yeah. And there's something really, really beautiful about that for sure.
Agreed.
One thing I would like to talk about, because I feel like Love What Matters does this really well, is this idea of how do you tell a real story, but still kind of have a hopeful takeaway or something positive without it being forced?
It's a good question. I think the real story aspect just happens organically, right? I think for us, it's really about trying to make sure we're being authentic. We really kind of handhold with our contributors, and we, make sure we take special care and time to walk through their experiences with them. And that's why the first person storytelling we, believe in so strongly, because we want you to feel like you're sitting in the room with these people, right? We want you to feel like you're experiencing this story next to them. And I think that, those conversations that you remember as you go through these experiences are so important because that's really what shapes everything that you go through.
I feel like can you tell us one more story that's really touched you? Because there are just so many that are good.
Sure. Yeah. I think another one that I like to use this one to explain to employees, the power of these stories and why there's, how and why they're so impactful. I was doing some video portraits, just one-on-one, videos where I would ask about 50 to 75 questions and see if I can kind of mimic the style of the website stories in video format. And I had a guy show up and we're going back and forth, and I was just, thank you so much for doing this. And he said to me, looked at me and says, of course I would do this. You've made me feel normal over the last couple of years. And I said, oh, that's great. What do you mean by that? And he said, well, I'm a member of the LGBT community, LGBTQ community. And when I looked around at, media outlets, there was nothing that talked to me. There was nothing that made me feel normal. There was nothing that talked about my lifestyle. And so part of what we've tried to do in Love What Matters is showcase, not just LGBTQ stories, but adoption and transgender and relationships. And, what does that lifestyle look like? What are their struggles that they're going through? And so to have someone tell you that you helped them feel normal was and is a pretty incredible thing. And I feel like it's a privilege, part of a privilege of what we get to do here. And I think it makes you realize the power of these stories that, yes, the storytelling component itself is so powerful, but really to have an impact on someone's life like that is the goal.
Absolutely. And I think you brought up a really great point, which is there is so much power in seeing your story reflected in someone else's, because it normalizes identities, it normalizes experience. I think that part of what, living through trauma or anything hard is this idea of I am the only person, I feel like the only person that's gone through this. Like, has anyone else been in my shoes? Has anyone, the moment you see yourself, even if it's not you, reflected in the story, whether it's a visual or a written component, there is such power in that. I think as a society, we still have a very long way to go, but I have seen a lot of progress the past few years in terms of showing a broad range of stories. And so I really hope that continues, and it makes me very excited that Love What Matters is doing that work.
Yeah, if you don't see yourself represented anywhere, where do you belong? Who are you, right? What is your identity? There's just so many questions there. So I think to the extent that we can start, in a very, very small way helping with that, then, that's great.
One of my favorite, I don't know who said it, but it's one of those quotes that always floats around. Like, if the story you want to read doesn't exist, write it yourself. And there is a lot of like, yes, the first time I heard that, I was like, that's what I'm going to do. Because I was just so sick of going to the library and pulling books off shelves, and none of them took place in hospitals. And if they did take place in a hospital, it was like Curious George goes to the hospital and he's like rolled in on a gurney, and then his heart is checked, and then he's all better. There was no one talking about IVs. There was no one talking about recovery. So to anyone out there who's afraid to tell their story, or they don't know if your story has a place, I say, please do it, because your story matters and it deserves to exist. And in whatever way you want to share it. So
absolutely. Well said.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's see. Well, one thing I actually wanted to share with you, and I didn't tell you that I did this, but I'd actually asked on the Mighty platform the reasons why people share their stories. And I actually have to, of course, I got rid of it on my screen, but I'll bring it up in one moment. Is there another story that you would like to tell us while I pull this up?
Sure. So one of my favorite stories from Love What Matters community is this happened, I believe, on Facebook. It was just, a mom who was distraught. She had a child who has autism, and her favorite shirt was either dirty to the point of it was ruined, or it was completely lost or destroyed. And they couldn't find this shirt anywhere. It's her favorite shirt, and she had been freaking out for the last 3 hours, and there was no end in sight. And the community rallied around, a community of strangers rallied around this stranger and bought hundreds and hundreds. They tracked down this shirt on the internet, and I was able to get her address and connect to them, and she approved that, thankfully, and helped send her hundreds of different shirts. So I think things like that. Those are always the goals. You never know if and when you're going to get there. But, the power of community that we've developed at Love What Matters, we're incredibly proud of. And I think, those strangers that can lean on one another and help each other out is always amazing to see.
I was hoping you'd tell that story. I heard that one yesterday, and it was very good. Okay, so when I'm looking at Mighty's telling me why they share their story, I was actually it's so cool to hear people articulate it, because everyone shares their story for different reasons, which is also, I really think, is the power of storytelling. No one does it for all the same reason. So I tell my story because holding it in hurts more than letting it out, which that really spoke to me. I speak to others who may want to understand or who have similarities. It doesn't delete the intensity, but it does lessen it, if only for a brief moment. I tell my story to let others know they are not alone, which is why I think a lot of people tell their stories. And there is such power in that, this idea. And I think that this year really shows it. We need to connect. We are at a human basis, we have to connect. And because we haven't been able to connect in a lot of ways this year, I think that's been hard. And that's kind of where storytelling comes in. So that one also really spoke to me. I tell my story so others can feel comfortable to tell theirs. It's kind of a nice ripple effect, to give people hope and feel the empathy I have with so many struggles. I tell my story to feel validated, encourage others to tell their stories and show their sensitivity, because it's okay to be vulnerable. And it goes on and on. But those were so great to me because they were all different. And it just goes to show that all of our stories are good, and we all have.
These are perfect. Yeah.
All have different ways to tell them. I guess I would love to talk about submissions, because I know that Love What Matters is, continually take submissions. Well, first I want to say, what are you seeing in submissions? Are you seeing a certain type of story?
Yeah, it's really all over the place. Runs the gamut from. Oh, geez. I would say it's a lot of parenting and parenting in a pandemic, and the millions of challenges that go with that are probably a lot of those submissions that come in, just because there's so many different layers, to that world, right? Because as a family unit, right, trying to pick up the slack of and contributing and helping out the other partner, whatever case you're in, there's just so many things going on there. So I think that's probably what the number one area we're seeing right now, and then. Number two is probably nurse stories, or just, public health stories in general around COVID, and, some beautiful things there on reunions that, elderly people who had not been able to see each other for a long time, or, people overcoming COVID who were on ventilators in the hospital, things like that. Things around COVID, especially because, again, that is, the national conversation right now. So I think everyone is experiencing the world within that context. So all of these stories are naturally going to happen within that world.
Definitely. We're seeing the same parenting during COVID, a lot of self-care stories, but one that's actually really stuck out to me, and is something that I don't think has been in the national conversation for a long time, is like layers of grief. So, and I think when we think about grief, we think about a person passing, which is obviously the more monumental grief, but there are other types of grief, right? There's grief on missing out on things. Grief we talk about a lot in the illness world, you grieve your old self, and having to kind of cope with the new normal. So we're seeing a lot of that at the Mighty, and I really don't see that going away, because people have missed times that they'll never get back. So I found that interesting. It's almost like a grief spectrum.
Yeah, I like that concept. And I like it especially more this year, because I think it's so many more people can relate to it, right? Mm-hmm. This is kind of going to be known as the lost year in so many different ways. So I think, everyone's going through, what the illness community or mental health community may have experienced, or, are used to experiencing. Now it's kind of opened up, and hopefully a lot of other people can relate to, oh, there's a lot more there than just this year.
You're speaking my language. I literally wrote a newsletter today, and it's all about how the chronic illness and mental health community and the disability community have been adapting and being flexible and adopting new routines for years, and having to make sacrifices and compromises. And now everyone's kind of joined aboard and learning how tough it actually is. So my hope out of that is that I'm hoping there will be a little bit more empathy towards that kind of lifestyle. I, for instance, had to stop working full-time in an office setting in 2016. I don't think I would ever go back, just because physically it was just too hard. I can't take long drives. There are just so many things I can't do. So it's interesting to me now that has become so much more normalized, right? People aren't going on vacations. They aren't traveling to see family members. So I do hope that doesn't go away. That the idea that maybe we can understand a little bit better what people go through. May that be a positive. Who knows?
Yeah. Again, I think, the thing that I don't know if you would, I guess you would call this a national tragedy, right? The thing that you hope to have happen, I think, out of things like this, is that you do have that learned empathy from people, and you do have people that, you know, say, wow, I appreciate the things that I have, this sense of gratitude. Don't they say that practicing gratitude is one of those proven ways
It's true.
to practice happiness, right? I mean, you know, you hope that you see more of that when this is all over.
Definitely. Is there anything like that you know, because you see a bunch of stories, as do I. Is there anything you kind of have learned over the years through the stories? Anything, lessons or things you've pocketed, or even just learning more about other types of experiences that you didn't know a lot about?
I think I am, even after doing this for 5 years, I think I am continuously amazed by the power and how willing people are to be vulnerable. The power of vulnerability, you know, again, it's, you know, you can't overstate it. It's really hard for people to open up and be real. And I think that there's real power in that, and there's real, you know, strength in that. And I think it's not easy to get there, to get to that place where you feel comfortable doing that. And I think, you know, some people are doing it while they feel uncomfortable, and that's even harder to do. And so, you know, I think I'm still to this day, and probably always will be, amazed at how willing people are to be so vulnerable.
I think until, in my opinion at least, until that's like a common everyday occurrence where you're walking down the street and someone shares their most personal thoughts, I think that being taken aback by vulnerability will always be there, because I am the same. Even though I'm a very vulnerable person and I've kind of gotten over the hump of talking about what I struggle with, I still to this day am brought to my knees when people share like the things that they have been hurt by or the things that they have gone through, and they're still willing to talk about it, because I think there still is such stigma to that, and there is such this idea that like I'm going to be judged for sharing who I am and what I've been through and sharing my heart, whether that is because of your identity or whether that is because of an experience that may be a little bit stigmatized. So I would say I am the exact same.
I'm going to get a little cheesy on you for a minute here.
Please. I love cheese in all its forms.
So there's some quote out there around how, you know, your biggest weakness is actually your biggest strength, right? And I think that's true, because you know, for me, you know, I'm an incredibly empathetic and sensitive person, and I think you can look at that and say, well, that's a weakness. But I think my story proves you can flip that on its head, and you can really use that and turn it into a strength. And I think if people can look at themselves and say, how do I do that? What's, you know, it's kind of a self-awareness thing, right? How do I realize, how do I recognize where I stand, and use what's in my life to propel myself forward? How do I recognize that? How do I make that happen? And I think that's not to get too cheesy, but I think that's something that everyone can do.
Totally. There's beauty in the brokenness, right? Like that is where the beauty comes from. Like we don't really get a lot from Sheen. Like while Sheen is really pretty and it's nice to look at perfect things, there's just no depth to it. And I think we really get to the depth in the brokenness.
Yes.
And that's a lot of what stories do, for sure.
And it's a lot more interesting.
Yes, a lot more interesting. I would actually so much rather read that or talk about that, even if it's harder.
Right. Nobody's life is perfect, right? Yeah. It's just, you know, being open.
Definitely not. I didn't say this at the beginning that I probably should have. Everyone's been listening to Colin and I chat, but there is a comment section. If anyone has comments or questions, go ahead and let us know. I'll definitely make sure I pop into the comments later on once people have watched the stream, just to see if there are any questions. But I do know in the comment section we have left, so you can find more about me, find out more about Colin, find out more about Love What Matters, and also how to submit your story. So you can go ahead and find all of those links in the comment section. I guess final thoughts, Colin. And one thing I do want to make sure I say is I would love for you to give any advice to anyone who thinks they can't share their story or are unsure. I would love to hear what you had to say.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think it's a personal choice. So I certainly wouldn't want to pressure anyone, but I think that if you sit with it for a little while and you let yourself recognize that there's really strength and power in letting yourself tell your story, that it has an opportunity to propel you somewhere else in life, to another level in life, if you only let yourself kind of deal with that and get over it. Well, that's not fair. You're not getting over it is not necessarily the goal, but getting to the next level with it. And I think that's going to help you process it. So I think, that's, letting it, sitting with it for a little while, sitting with your story, processing it, going through it, and then thinking about, well, what could happen if I use this as a strength to lift myself up. I think, that's a way of getting yourself there. But everybody goes at their own pace, and everybody's not going to be ready to tell their story the day after it happens, the month after it happens, or even the year after it happens, right? Sometimes everybody has to go and tell, when they're ready.
Definitely. I think what you said is so true. Like, you have to tell your story on your own timeline, because if you're not telling it on your own timeline, then it's not truly your story in a way, right? Because you need to have processed it and got to a point where your story is authentically you. It took me 13 years to share mine. And I'm still not even sure if I have fully shared my story, right? My story is constantly developing, learning new parts about myself. And I think had someone pushed me to share my story, 10 years ago, it would have been, I would never have wanted to share it again, I think. And I would have been a little traumatized for it. But I'm so happy I did it in my own time. And I think that, telling other people that is there's a lot of power in that too.
Also, the rawness of dealing with it in the moment, or even a month after it's happening, is incredibly overwhelming and incredibly, it's always going to be hard, but it's even more challenging, more difficult to do if you're currently living it, right? So I think there's got to be some time afterwards to kind of think about it.
Definitely. Melissa actually had a really good comment. Said vulnerability is strength and also involves a level of self-acceptance. And I don't think everyone realizes that vulnerability and sharing those parts of yourself is a huge strength. But it also does require you to be at some level of acceptance of your situation, of what you've been through. And you kind of have to reach that level. And again, for me, at least, I have to continually accept my circumstances, right? Like, I'm okay for a while, and then I start the grief cycle all over again. And that could be true for a lot of people's situations.
Right, and that's natural.
Yeah, exactly. But some people still don't believe that, which is always frustrating to me. But I like that you think it's just right. Everyone should know that.
Yeah, I mean, I just think everybody, we're all on this rock together, right? We're all trying to get through life and grow and heal and change. And I think it takes a lot of work to do it effectively. And I think it takes a lot of understanding and putting yourself in other people's shoes. So that's where the empathy, always comes in.
Definitely. Well, if you don't have any last thoughts, I just wanted to thank you so much for being here today and sharing Love What Matters with us. It's making a lot of happiness and kindness and empathy happen in the world. So thank you so much for starting it.
I just want to compliment you on your journey and thank you for everything that you do at the Mighty. I think you guys, one of my favorite platforms out there. I love all of your stories. I love what you're doing for the mental health community is absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Awesome. Well, I hope everyone has a really lovely day and stay safe out there.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.